There is a tape of Carolyn Bessette Kennedy's voice. Not an interview. Not a statement. A tape. It lasts 11 seconds total. 2 clips. That is the entire public audio record of a woman America believed it knew intimately, a woman photographed thousands of times, whose marriage to JFK Jr. generated millions of words of coverage, whose face appeared on magazine covers she never approved. 11 seconds. 3 years of public life. The first clip, 8 seconds. A red carpet in Los Angeles, 1998. She says, verbatim, "It was a very exciting and wonderful evening." Then she turns away. The second, 3 seconds. May 19, 1999. The last public event she ever attended. She says, "I think it's sort of fabulous. I hope they're all sitting with me." Then the camera moves on. Carolyn Bessette Kennedy never gave a single interview. Not to Vogue. Not to the New York Times. Not to anyone. Every word written about her marriage, the fairy tale, the glamour, the love story of the decade, came from people she had refused to speak to. The love story was built entirely on her silence. Let me show you what the documents actually say. New York Times. September 22, 1996. The morning after. John F. Kennedy Jr., the son of the 35th President of the United States, married Carolyn Bessette in a private ceremony on Cumberland Island, Georgia, on Saturday evening. America responded as though it had been waiting years for the permission to exhale. The wedding photographs, pine and salt air, candlelight, a white Narciso Rodriguez dress, sold to every major magazine on both sides of the Atlantic. People's. Hello. The Washington Post used the phrase, "a fairy tale in the old style." The coverage was unanimous. But pull the photographs back a layer, and the details are stranger than the romance. She had not told her own mother the wedding was happening until the night before. Fewer than 40 guests, every single one of whom had signed a non-disclosure agreement. The county probate court clerk dispatched to a small plane to collect their signatures. She didn't know who they were, she told the Times afterward, until Carolyn said the name would be Bessette Kennedy. At that point, the clerk understood. "Carolyn asked us on the airplane to please keep it quiet," the clerk said. That they had gone to great lengths. They went to great lengths for privacy throughout the marriage. They failed entirely every time. But here is what the fairy tale coverage missed, the thing sitting in plain sight from the first morning. The story was told with full confidence about a woman who had not said a single word. Before the Kennedys, there is another record. A different one. Boston University, class of 1988. Education major. Senior yearbook, voted ultimate beautiful person. That phrase could scan as decorative, a pretty girl, a nice smile, the kind of entry that doesn't tell you much. But the friends who describe her don't reach for appearance. They reach for presence. Jonathan Soroff, a journalist who knew her in Boston, told biographer Elizabeth Beller that Carolyn was out constantly, clubs, bars, restaurants, anywhere there were people. Not performing. Present. Genuinely present. M.J. Bettenhausen, a close friend from those years, described one night they snuck tequila into a concert by pouring it into Ziploc bags and tucking them into their boots. Not to get wasted. Just Bettenhausen said, in the spirit of fun. Robbie Liddell, one of John Kennedy's oldest friends, said in the 2024 oral biography that she was able to get dirty. That she and John understood that sometimes there has to be a little grime to have a good time. Electric. Dynamite. Vivid. These words appear from different mouths, across different decades. Her roommate Colleen Curtis gave Beller the sentence that matters most, not a letter, not a legal document, but a plain statement about character. What people don't realize is how central work was to Carolyn. She always worked. Always, always, always. That work had weight behind it. She had spent nearly 8 years at Calvin Klein, salesperson, publicist, PR director, show production director. She oversaw runway shows. She worked alongside Kate Moss, Annette Bening. She was, by every colleague account, exceptional, meticulous, intuitive, someone who understood how image was constructed because she understood people first. That woman, the one who was always working, who lit up rooms, who snuck tequila into concerts and then turned around and ran a runway show, is who married John F. Kennedy Jr. in September 1996. By spring 1997, 6 months into the marriage, the tabloid vocabulary had already calcified. Ice Queen, Gold Digger, Cokehead, Cheater. Not one label sourced to a named witness. Not one attached to a document, a medical record, a financial filing. Printed as established fact, rotated like a shared glossary, applied to a woman the outlets had never spoken to. Beller systematically documents the rebuttal in Once Upon a Time 2024. Every friend she interviewed, without exception, said they had never seen Carolyn use cocaine. Multiple friends called the rumors specifically directly false. The Washington Post called her a raging party girl. Jonathan Soroff, who actually knew her, described a woman who had a glass of wine, maybe two, and once smuggled tequila into a concert in a bag because it was funny. These are not the same person. Beller places this in its historical context precisely. She writes that the 1990s backlash against women, the decade that dismissed Anita Hill, reduced Marcia Clark to a hairstyle, and blamed Monica Lewinsky for her own exploitation, leveled unprecedented vitriol at Carolyn. What the tabloids had, instead of evidence, was access. Photographers stationed outside her building. Daily. Every arrival, every departure, every attempt at a walk to a friend's apartment. Men with cameras running alongside her, screaming insults designed to produce a usable expression. A beautiful woman caught in anger was worth more than a beautiful woman going about her day. They got reactions. They printed them as character. One version of the record, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, Ice Queen, volatile, possibly unhinged. Another version, a private person with no training for public life and no desire for it, being stalked daily by an industry that required her to be a problem in order to remain a story. Before the wedding, there is the park. February 25, 1996. Washington Square Park, New York City. They had eaten at the Tribeca Grill. They collected their dog, Friday. They walked. Paparazzo Angie Cochran was already there. A video camera was also running. What the footage documented, 2 people in a screaming fight. John pulls the engagement ring from Carolyn's finger. She runs after him when he walks away. She leaps onto his back. He pushes at her jaw. She grips the back of his neck. He sits on the sidewalk, head in his hands. Eventually, something that looks like reconciliation. They leave together. The National Enquirer ran an 8-photo spread. Headline, Sunday in the Park with the George editor. Before publication, Kennedy's representatives contacted the outlet and described the allegations as not true and totally made up. The images ran anyway. When the photos were published, Kennedy approached Cochran's car and reached through the window, toward the camera or toward her arm, depending on whose account you read. Carolyn told him to stop. 2 things are documented. First, this was a private argument between 2 engaged people, captured without their knowledge. Second, the coverage assigned fault almost entirely to her. She was described as volatile, aggressive, destabilizing. John Kennedy, who was also shouting, also crying, also sitting on a sidewalk in the grip of something he could not hold together, was described as the man she was putting through difficulty. Town and Country, revisiting the footage 30 years later, noted that Cochran recalled Kennedy appearing to physically push Bessette during the ordeal. That detail was not the focus of the 1996 coverage. The year of the wedding. Also the year Carolyn Bessette left Calvin Klein. She had not been planning to leave. Beller's sourcing is consistent across multiple named accounts. The resignation was not ambition. It was evacuation. Paparazzi had begun stationing themselves outside the Calvin Klein offices. Daily. Her arrivals, departures, lunch breaks tracked and sold. The disruption made it structurally impossible to do her job. Beller writes that it had become impossible for Bessette to even walk into the building. Calvin Klein's public statement, she was ready to move on. What a colleague told Beller, Klein was very upset by her resignation. He felt left behind. What Sasha Chermayeff, one of John's oldest friends, present at the wedding, said publicly to Page 6 in 2026, she left her job basically because everything had to revolve around John and George magazine. She was supposed to sort of give up everything in order to make his career moves more palatable for the world. And I feel sad about it. She felt sad about it in 2026. Carolyn felt it in 1996, in real time with no exit. After leaving Calvin Klein, she explored nonprofit work. Considered returning to school for psychology. Had conversations about using her PR skills for fundraising. None of it happened. Because any organization she formally attached her name to required vetting against John's potential political future. Because any visible professional identity complicated the optics of George magazine. Because every move required negotiation with a life that was not structured around her. The public called her idle. They did not know she was trying to figure out how to have a life inside an architecture that had closed almost every door. The date matters. Princess Diana died on August 31, 1997, in a Paris tunnel, in a car being pursued by photographers. She was 36 years old. Rose Marie Terenzio, John Kennedy's personal assistant, who later co-authored the oral biography, documented what happened when John and Carolyn learned the news. Carolyn turned to John. She told him the paparazzi were dangerous. Not reckless. Not annoying. Dangerous. The specific word is documented. Carol Radziwill, whose husband Anthony was John's closest friend, then in the final stages of cancer, said, Princess Diana, she was our age, pretty much. The underlying way in which she died, which was being literally hounded to death by paparazzi. That lesson was definitely not lost on Carolyn. Royal biographer Tina Brown, in the CNN documentary American Prince, said Diana and Carolyn lived very, very similar lives because neither had any practical privacy. Gary Ginsberg, John's colleague at George, I'm sure Carolyn was watching it and feeling like she was the American version of it. It probably just increased her sense of isolation and frustration. Here is the gap. Diana's death generated global mourning. Editorial debates. Cover stories asking whether the press had finally gone too far. Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, in those same weeks in those same newspapers, continued to be described as cold, difficult, probably unfaithful, possibly a drug addict. She had watched what the machine was capable of. She had been living inside it for a year. She named it correctly in the moment she said it aloud. The coverage did not change. Beller's account of this period is precise. Fall and winter of 1997, tabloid reporting reaches a peak. The marriage is essentially over, sources say. Divorce is imminent. Carolyn has left. All of it unsourced, all of it unnamed, all of it published. What Beller documents through named accounts actually present, the reporting created its own kind of damage. Carol Radziwill described what was happening to Carolyn as a form of gaslighting, the relentless experience of acquaintances asking whether what they had just read was true. Whether she was really an addict. Whether John was really leaving. It interrupts the navigation of these relationships, Radziwill told Beller, and you can find yourself as confused as the tabloids are. By early 1998, according to John's longtime friend Jack Merrill, Carolyn was falling apart and, in the midst of several crises. A woman voted ultimate beautiful person in her senior year. Described by her college friends as someone who called because she'd caught a look on your face earlier and guessed, correctly, that you needed someone to check on you. Called a super empath by her friend Michelle. That woman was, in Jack Merrill's documented words, falling apart. In the loft on Northmoor Street, with photographers outside. Chermayeff said it most clearly, Carolyn's life disappeared. Not Carolyn. Her life's. The one rooted in work and friendship and professional identity, and the daily freedom to move through a city she loved. She kept showing up at charity dinners, at Kennedy family events, at public appearances alongside John. She was thinner, more wary. But she showed up. The public saw her and described her as cold. They did not know she had arrived from inside, something that had taken almost everything. This is where the fairy tale breaks. By summer 1999, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy were in marriage counseling. Multiple sources confirmed this independently to biographer Elizabeth Beller. Multiple sources confirmed it separately to People magazine in 2025. It is not disputed by any credible named source. What is also documented from that period, John had told close friends the marriage was no longer intimate. Stephen M. Gillen, John's friend and biographer, author of America's Reluctant Prince, confirmed this account. His documented quote, attributed directly, he told a friend, if she's done, I'm done. He said they needed to make changes. Otherwise, the marriage was going to be over. Edward Klein's 2003 book, The Kennedy Curse, goes further. Klein cites sources claiming Carolyn had walked out of a counseling session and that John had at some point moved to the Stanhope Hotel. These are Klein's claims. Robert Liddell, who spent a full weekend with John and Carolyn 1 week before the crash, explicitly rejected the assertion they were living apart. Both versions are in the record. Both are documented as such. What Beller does not dispute, the counseling. The intimacy. The difficulty of that summer. Her framing, quoted directly, I see it as a positive that they were taking meaningful steps to work on their issues. And I do believe things were getting better. Taking meaningful steps to work on their issues. The fairy tale was already behind them. What was happening in the summer of 1999 was something harder and more honest. Two people in their 30s trying to repair a marriage under conditions that would test most things to breaking. Anthony Radziwill was dying, and they both knew it. George magazine was struggling. A political future had not materialized, but had not been released. A woman had lost her career and her freedom, and was still trying to find a way back to herself. The public had photographs of them walking their dog. The fairy tale, preserved in tabloid paper. Undisturbed. I want to stop here. Because something keeps coming back to me while working inside this record. The 1990s backlash against women, the one Beller documents, the one that dismissed Anita Hill and turned Marcia Clark into a punchline and blamed Monica Lewinsky for being in the same room as the most powerful man in the world, that backlash had one consistent move. It took whatever a woman was doing to protect herself and renamed it her personality flaw. The woman who needed distance, called cold. The woman who held professional standards, called difficult. The woman who refused to perform warmth on cue for people whose business required her to be a character rather than a person, called an ice queen. Carolyn Bessette Kennedy's reserve was not her character. It was her strategy. The only instrument she had left in a situation that had already taken everything else. And that instrument was used as evidence against her. Every woman watching this has felt some version of that moment. When your protection gets reclassified as your problem. When someone describes your boundary as your damage. When the thing keeping you intact is the thing they hold up and say, "See, this is why she is difficult." That is what this record is actually documenting. And I think you recognized it before I said it out loud. If this work means something to you, these stories, the ones buried under other people's versions, subscribe now and ring the bell. There is more. There is always more. After Calvin Klein, there was the question of who she was now. The record on this is consistent across multiple sources, and it is a record of systematic foreclosure. She wanted to study psychology. Not as a hobby, she researched programs, discussed it with friends, was serious about it. She was looking for a way to use what she was good at, in a more direct way than PR had allowed. She couldn't. A Kennedy wife in a graduate program was a news story. Every professor, every paper she submitted, every classmate potentially a source. She wanted to work in nonprofits. She had the skills, the connections, the profile. She couldn't. Any cause she formally attached her name to required vetting against John's potential political future. A misstep would become his liability. She couldn't return to fashion. George existed at the intersection of politics and culture, and a wife visibly entrenched in fashion complicated the optics. She did what she could do. She sat with Anthony Radziwill during cancer treatments. Carol told Beller that Carolyn insisted on coming, that she showed up and held people in the particular way she had, as if she might never see you again. She attended White House dinners. She appeared at events. She stood next to John in carefully chosen clothes, saying nothing to cameras, generating column inches about whether she'd lost too much weight or what her expression signified. She was nominated for Best Female Personal Style at the 1997 Vogue/VH1 Fashion Awards. She lost to Courtney Love, the woman who had overseen runway shows at Calvin Klein, who understood image construction at a professional level, who had a gift for reading what people needed, was now the image. Object rather than architect. Seen rather than seeing. Terenzio said it plainly in the oral biography. To be married to John, you had to be ready to go anywhere with him at a moment's notice. His timing. His schedule. His magazine. His future. Chermayeff, 2026. She was supposed to sort of give up everything in order to make his career moves more palatable for the world. She felt sad about it in 2026. Carolyn felt it in real time, with no language to describe it publicly that wouldn't become a headline by morning. May 19, 1999. The Newmans' own George Award ceremony. New York City. John and Carolyn arrive together. She is in a dark dress. He is in a suit. They are photographed at the entrance. This is the last public event they will attend together. An entertainment Tonight camera catches her at the door. She gives her 3-second recorded quote, "I think it's sort of fabulous. I hope they're all sitting with me." Her voice is lower than most people expect. Warm underneath the composure. faintly wry. And in that sentence, the hope that her people are there, that she will not be alone in the room, you hear something about what these events had cost her. Not glamour. Endurance. The photographs from that evening show a woman who is thin, noticeably thinner than in 1996. Multiple accounts note this. Beller does not speculate about cause. She records that it was observed. The public account of the photographs, they looked beautiful. A glamorous couple. What the record says about that same week, marriage counseling ongoing. Anthony Radziwill has approximately 70 days to live, and everyone around him knows it. The summer Gillen describes, though if she's done, I'm done, summer has begun. Carol Radziwill says they looked happy and in love at times. She also says this while watching her own husband die. Two things can be true. They probably were. Two people trying, in public, at a charity event for a magazine she had given 3 years of her life to support. 58 days later, she is gone. July 16, 1999. Essex County Airport, New Jersey. Approximately 8:38 in the evening. A Piper Saratoga PA 32R-301, a single-engine high-performance aircraft. Pilot John F. Kennedy Jr. Age 38. Passengers Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, 33. Her sister Lauren Bessette, 34. Destination Martha's Vineyard Airport. The occasion the wedding of John's cousin Rory Kennedy the following day at Hyannis Port. Lauren would stop at the vineyard to spend time with friends. Carolyn had not originally been scheduled to attend. The wedding was a Kennedy family event. It was Lauren who persuaded both of them to make the trip together, according to sources cited by Edward Klein in The Kennedy Curse, and reported without contradiction by CBS News on this specific detail. John had reviewed weather reports around 6:30 that evening. Conditions along the route included haze. The flight was rated acceptable under visual flight rules. The pilot could fly by visual reference rather than instruments alone. His flight instructor, Filippo L. Pezzi, had been asked to accompany the flight. He declined. The NTSB report notes that when investigators later spoke with El Pezzi, he stated he would not have made that flight that night, under those conditions. John flew without him. John F. Kennedy Jr. held a private pilot certificate, issued April 1998. Approximately 310 total flight hours. Of those, approximately 55 at night. He was not instrument rated. The NTSB report notes, in its own language, that crossing large bodies of water at night in single-engine aircraft could be potentially hazardous, because the lack of cultural lighting results in few visual references. The technical phrase for, over the dark ocean there is no horizon. Nothing to orient by. Your body's vestibular system tells you one thing. The plane may be doing another. And without instrument training, the gap between what you feel and what is happening can become unsurvivable. Carolyn Bessette Kennedy was in the back of that plane. She had no controls, no instrument rating, no ability to intervene. She was a passenger in a situation she had not created and could not change. National Transportation Safety Board. Final report. July 2000. Probable cause, verbatim, the pilot's failure to maintain control of the airplane during a descent over water at night, which was a result of spatial disorientation. Factors in the accident were haze and the dark night. Spatial disorientation, the condition that occurs when a pilot loses the visual horizon and the body's sensory systems provide false information about orientation in space. The semicircular canals in the inner ear register banking as level flight. The altimeter descends, while the controls feel like a climb. The pilot pushes forward when he should pull back. The final radar data shows what investigators describe as a graveyard spiral. An accelerating, steep, nose-down descent the pilot may not have perceived as such until the end. All three were wearing seatbelts. Navy divers recovered the wreckage, and the three bodies at approximately 120 feet of depth, 7.5 miles southwest of Gay Head, Martha's Vineyard, on July 21, 1999. The medical examiner determined they died on impact. This is the place in the record where the gap becomes something else entirely. Carolyn Bessette Kennedy spent 3 years being called cold, difficult, a problem. She lost her career and her freedom and her professional identity. She watched Princess Diana die and called it correctly dangerous. She tried to repair a marriage fracturing under conditions that would fracture most things. She showed up to the Newman's own ceremony on May 19, thinner than she had been, and said, "I hope they're all sitting with me." And then she got on a plane at night, over the ocean in the haze. She did not fly that plane. She was in the back. After the recovery. After the memorial service aboard the USS Briscoe, where Senator Edward Kennedy watched his nephew's ashes scattered at sea, after all of it, the people who actually knew them tried to hold what was true. Robert Liddell, 1 week before the crash, had spent a full weekend with them. He stated explicitly they were not living apart. He rejected that claim by name. What he saw was two people still present, still working, still together. Sasha Chermayeff, John and Carolyn were wonderful people. They fell in love, they had a stunning, dreamlike wedding. I don't know what would have come to pass had they not died that night 20 summers ago, and no one does. Stephen Gillen, there's evidence his relationship could have been saved. Right up until the time he dies, he's fighting to turn his life around. And Colleen Curtis, Carolyn's roommate from before the name, before the wedding, before the photographs, said the following to Beller, and it may be the truest sentence in the entire record. One of the most tragic elements of Carolyn's story is simply that everyone who knew her, no matter how depressed she was by the press, and how uncertain she was about the long-term health of her marriage, was confident that she was going to be just fine. Everyone who actually knew her was confident she was going to be just fine. Not the tabloids. Not the unnamed sources. Not the photographers who had staked out her building for 3 years. The people who knew her. They thought she was going to be fine. Newman's own George Awards. New York City. May 19, 1999. An Entertainment Tonight camera running at the entrance. The arrivals. John Kennedy walking in with his wife. Carolyn Bessette Kennedy approaches. Someone off camera asks her something. The question is inaudible, lost in the ambient noise of a New York City event in 1999. She answers. 3 seconds. I think it's sort of fabulous. I hope they're all sitting with me. Then she moves past the camera. That is the last public record of her voice. She sounds warm. Certain of herself. A little wry, a little dry, the humor in it, the intelligence, the quality her friends kept reaching for and kept running out of words to describe. Electric. Dynamite. And underneath the sentence, if you listen, the hope that her people are there. That in a room full of cameras and press, and the apparatus of public life that had consumed her for 3 years, someone she actually knows will be sitting next to her. She was 33 years old. She had spent 3 years being photographed without consent, analyzed without evidence, labeled without witnesses, and misrepresented by an industry she had refused to address. She had lost her career. She had lost her freedom of movement. She had watched Princess Diana die and identified it correctly for what it was. She had been called cold because she protected herself. She had been in counseling and trying. She had kept showing up. The entire public record of her voice, every question she walked past, every reporter she declined, every night she returned to the loft on North Moore Street while photographers waited outside, it comes down to 11 seconds. 8 of them given to a red carpet camera in 1998. It was a very exciting and wonderful evening. 3 given on the last night anyone would ever see her alive in public. I think it's sort of fabulous. I hope they're all sitting with me. The rest is silence. The rest was always silence. She chose that silence because the alternative, speaking, performing, feeding the machine, was not something she was willing to do. Even when refusing had costs. Even when the costs were named Ice Queen and difficult and problem. Even when her silence was immediately filled, by other people, with their versions of who she was. She held the line. She did not give them her voice. We have 11 seconds of it. We know almost nothing, from her, about what her life actually was. And somehow, from that silence, we built a love story. We built it for ourselves. She was never inside it.